That question is no longer a distant hypothesis as clashes between the United States and both Russia and China intensify, while flashpoints in Europe, the Pacific, and the Middle East grow ever more complex. With nuclear arsenals being modernized, cyber warfare occurring daily, and alliances stretched thin, asking directly about the survival of the world's #1 superpower is not only legitimate, but necessary. Before answering, we must agree on what destruction means in the 21st century. Destruction is not only cities reduced to ashes or armies crushed on the battlefield. Destruction is also the paralysis of the system that sustains 330 million people. Economic collapse, institutional paralysis, social fragmentation, and the crippling of infrastructure. On the military level, while the U.S. possesses the most powerful forces in history, its territory is no longer out of reach. Hypersonic missiles cut reaction times down to minutes. Terrain-hugging cruise missiles can slip through gaps in defenses. Nuclear-armed submarines patrol offshore, ready to launch a devastating first strike. Even without nuclear use, precision strikes could wipe out command centers, early warning stations, air bases, and strategic communication nodes. On the economic level, America's strength relies on global trade, the dollar's reserve status, and sprawling transcontinental supply chains. In a world war, these links would be severed overnight. Energy prices would spike, sea lanes would clog, maritime insurance would drive risk premiums beyond affordability, while payment systems and financial markets would suffer wave after wave of cyber attacks. This time, Wall Street would not collapse from normal market cycles, but from deliberate campaigns designed to dismantle America's financial command center. On the social level, the U.S. is already deeply polarized by politics, media, and regional divides. War would pry those cracks wide open. Debates over conscription, mobilization, budget priorities, and civil liberties could spark protests and local unrest. Adversaries would deliberately inject disinformation, exploiting race, class, and partisanship to erode trust in institutions and in each other. When community trust breaks down, the nation's ability to sustain a war effort weakens dramatically. On the infrastructure level, interregional power grids, rail networks, strategic ports, satellite systems, and the internet backbone are all prime targets. A coordinated campaign of cyber and kinetic attacks could bring down regional grids, ignite critical transformers, jam GPS signals, and paralyze air traffic and shipping flows. Water treatment plants, hospitals, fuel depots, and logistics centers, usually invisible in peacetime, would suddenly become life-or-death choke points. Infrastructure destruction does not require bombs to fall on Manhattan. It only requires blinding the systems that modern life depends on. So what sequence of events could drag the United States into such a spiral? The European Channel is a classic scenario. If Russia expanded its war into Poland or a Baltic state, NATO's Article 5 would compel Washington into direct military intervention. Forward bases in Germany, Poland, and Romania, along with logistical hubs like Ramstein, would become priority targets. The Pacific Channel is another axis. A blockade, a military drill that slips into collision, or a Chinese landing on Taiwan could trigger aerial combat, naval clashes, and an anti-access war stretching from the East China Sea to the South China Sea. In the Middle East, if Iran-Israel tensions escalate, U.S. carrier groups would be immediately pulled in, opening yet another grinding front. Simultaneously, the invisible domain is cyberspace. An assault on clearinghouses, core banking systems, or interregional power grids during peak load seasons could be treated as an act of war, triggering retaliation and escalation spirals. Looking at systemic vulnerabilities, America's missile defense cannot guarantee interception of hypersonic weapons with extreme speed and maneuverability. Coastal cities concentrate populations and critical infrastructure. Supply chains depend on foreign sources for pharmaceuticals, electronic components, batteries, rare earth magnets, and strategic materials. Once trade fractures, shortages would spread within weeks. Medicine, machine parts, fertilizers, replacement equipment for power grids and rail networks. Seemingly minor items like pressure valves or industrial chips could bring entire systems to a halt. From there, one can picture the escalation ladder. Step 1. Limited clashes. Warships confront each other, jets intercept, cyber campaigns cause localized outages. The U.S. suffers clear economic harm, but society holds together. Step 2. Regional war. The U.S. commits air and naval power, deploys some ground forces. Casualties mount, global markets crash, supply chains fracture. Cruise missiles begin to strike U.S. bases and depots, while cyber campaigns target energy and finance. Step 3. Multi-front conflict. Europe ignites, the Pacific ignites, the Middle East burns. The U.S. is stretched thin. Its ability to deter multiple adversaries simultaneously declines, creating openings for secondary actors like North Korea to test the waters. Step 4. Nuclear threshold. When one side perceives strategic defeat, tactical nuclear weapons could be used as a coercive step. But the nuclear ladder is slippery. Retaliation leads to strategic exchange, turning destruction into reality, with cities erased and national order altered forever. History shows the world has stood on the edge before, as in the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. Back then, direct dialogue diffused the bomb. Today, communication channels are weaker, trust is thinner, and actors are more numerous, making breaking far harder to predict. During the Cold War, deterrence rested on bipolar balance. Today's multipolar environment, with nations holding varied nuclear doctrines, complicates risk calculations. One-sided wars like 1991 are not the template for conflicts between peers. The grinding lesson of 2003 reminds us that material power is insufficient if strategy, objectives, diplomacy, and domestic politics are misaligned. If war does break out, America's endurance would not depend solely on missiles or carriers. The U.S. has geographic depth, vast resources, immense reserves, cutting-edge technology, and unrivaled innovation. The broadest alliance system in the world, NATO and Europe, Japan, South Korea, Australia, the Philippines, and the Pacific, creates strategic leverage unmatched by adversaries. The nuclear triad underpins deterrence, while America's industry, if mobilized into a true war economy, could scale production of munitions, missiles, radars, aircraft, surface ships, and submarines. But there is the flip side of time. Restarting complex production lines cannot happen overnight. Skilled labor cannot be trained instantly. And when raw inputs depend on foreign sources, bottlenecks emerge. Domestic unity is another unknown. Prolonged political infighting could delay strategic decisions, create inconsistent foreign messaging, and weaken deterrence and diplomacy. Another dimension is financial warfare. If adversaries coordinated to cut off commodity markets, drive up oil and LNG prices, assault payment systems, and pressure neutral nations to avoid the dollar, the U.S. economy would take a double hit. External trade choked, internal credit costs soaring. Wartime budget burdens, combined with waves of corporate defaults if credit suddenly tightens, could trigger a deep recession. The middle class, the backbone of social stability, would see its resilience eroded. At that point, the risk of turmoil would not lie on the battlefield, but in the nation's own cities. Some ask, could America be erased entirely? That probability remains low, because nuclear deterrence works on the principle of mutual survival. A single strategic exchange would annihilate both attacker and defender. For this reason, major powers all have incentives to avoid crossing the ultimate line. But partial destruction is a far more realistic risk. A badly damaged economy, prolonged disruption of energy and logistics, a society fractured deeply, and institutional trust undermined. Such an America would not be occupied or forced to surrender, but its global leadership capacity would be gravely diminished, the dollar's dominance challenged, and alliances shaken. Even so, the future is not only gray. America has survived the Great Depression, World War II, the oil shocks, protracted wars, and the financial crisis. Each time the system restructured, reinvented technologies, expanded production, and strengthened institutions. That resilience comes from a dynamic market, world-leading universities and research centers, risk-taking enterprises, and a resourceful civil society. In crisis, if political leadership can reach minimal consensus, set clear objectives, mobilize private technology into defense and critical infrastructure, and maintain diplomatic channels to contain conflicts, the probability of partial destruction drops significantly. In the end, the answer to will America be destroyed if World War III happens? It is not an absolute yes or no. It is a conditional probability, conditioned on strategy, on technology, on society, and on diplomacy. If war remains below the nuclear threshold, if fronts are limited, if vital supply chains are protected, and if society maintains minimal consensus, the U.S. will suffer heavy losses but avoid systemic collapse. If the opposite occurs, multi-front escalation, strikes on critical infrastructure, prolonged energy crises, financial turmoil, and social disintegration, then partial destruction could very well become reality. If you find this analysis direct and necessary in such a fragile era, subscribe to WW3 Watch and turn on the notification bell right now. Your support helps us keep producing content that is clear, fact-based, neither fear-mongering nor sugarcoating. Understanding risk correctly is the first step to surviving them, and preparation today is the only way to avoid panic tomorrow.